They dragged her off the runway, not knowing the woman they humiliated owned the entire show.
Imagine designing the biggest fashion show of your life, your dream finally coming true, and then right in the middle of it, two police officers storm the runway and drag you away in handcuffs. Cameras flash, the crowd whispers, and no one moves to help. They call you a trespasser on your own stage. But what no one in that room knows, not the officers, not the guests, not even the journalist, is that the woman they're humiliating doesn't just work for the show, she owns it. What happens next will silence every whisper, shatter every stereotype, and turn a moment of disgrace into one of the most powerful reversals you've ever seen. Stay with me, because by the time this story ends, you'll understand why the world had to see it happen. The runway gleamed like glass beneath the lights. Ava Sinclair reached the end and turned, silk trailing behind her like smoke. Then a voice cracked through the air, hard, commanding, "Hands behind your back, now." The applause collapsed. Two officers pushed through the crowd, their boots loud against the marble floor. Officer Harlow's shadow fell across Ava's white gown as he grabbed her wrist. Cameras that had adored her seconds ago now devoured her humiliation. "You don't belong here," he said, his breath rough against the mic. A murmur rippled through the front row. A woman whispered, "Maybe she isn't supposed to be here." No one moved. Ava didn't resist. She kept her chin high, the set of her shoulders unbroken. The second officer clamped the cuffs, metal bit into her skin. "Trespassing," Harlow sneered. "Pretty dress. Wrong show." The words stung louder than the clatter of cameras. She felt hundreds of eyes cut through her skin, weighing her worth. Still, she stayed silent. Silence, she had learned, had its own power. Juliet Moore, a fashion editor, seated near the stage, stood up. "Officer, please, this is a private event." Harlow didn't even look at her. "Sit down, ma'am." The way he said it made the crowd shrink back. Juliet hesitated, shame tightening her chest. Harlow leaned close to Ava. "Thought you could sneak in, huh? Pretend you belong." Ava met his eyes. "What I am doesn't change because you're shouting," she said quietly. The smirk on his face faltered. He shoved her forward. Her heels clicked against the runway, slow and steady. She counted each step, 10 to the stairs, 8 to the door, because counting kept the world from spinning. Around her, guests found excuses to look away. Some lifted their phones, not to help but to record. The lights turned harsh, showing every face that chose silence. As she neared the exit, memories pressed in. Her mother's voice back in Atlanta, saying, "Baby, when they tell you there's no room, build your own door." Tonight had been the night she'd walked through it. Her own fashion show, her designs, her dream realized. And now the world was watching it, stripped away. "Keep moving," the second officer barked. Harlow's grip dug deeper. Ava's pulse steadied. Fear was a luxury she had never been able to afford. Near the wings, Juliet's heart pounded. She flipped through the event list on her phone and froze. There it was in bold letters at the top. Creative director, founder, Ava Sinclair. Her throat went dry. "Wait," she whispered, half to herself. "She runs this show." Before she could speak, heavy footsteps echoed from the entrance. The glass doors swung open. A man in a dark suit strode in, with quiet authority. Evan Trent, the head of security. His eyes locked on Ava's cuffed wrists. "Unhand her," he said, voice low but carrying. The officers didn't move. "Sir, this is an active arrest," Harlow said, his confidence cracked. Evan stepped closer, flashing his credentials. "Not anymore. You just manhandled the CEO of this event." The room went dead silent. Juliet gasped. Phones lifted again, this time trembling. The audience turned toward Ava, suddenly seeing her differently. Ava drew a slow breath. She didn't gloat, didn't smile. She simply stood, the weight of the lights, now her crown instead of her punishment. Harlow's jaw twitched. "She's lying," he muttered, but the certainty had drained from his voice. Evan's tone sharpened. "You want proof? Check the registration papers outside." Ava Sinclair, founder and owner of the Sinclair House Collection. You just dragged the wrong woman off her own runway. Gasps broke across the hall like rain. The crowd that had been frozen in complicity leaned forward in disbelief. Ava's cuffed hands trembled slightly. She steadied them. "I told you," she said quietly. "What I am doesn't change when men talk." The metal cuffs glinted under the lights as Evan stepped closer. "Remove them," he ordered. The younger officer hesitated, then obeyed. The sound of metal unlocking filled the room, sharp, final. Ava rubbed her wrists, red and raw. The cameras kept rolling. Somewhere in the back, applause began. One pair of hands, then another. It spread through the hall, awkward at first, then rising like the crowd was begging forgiveness with its palms. Ava stood tall, breathing hard, every muscle trembling from restraint. The humiliation hadn't broken her, it had revealed her, and though the night was far from over, every person in that room already knew they had witnessed something larger than fashion. Backstage, the air felt heavier than smoke. Assistants froze mid-step, threads dangling from their fingers, as Ava walked past, still rubbing the red marks on her wrists. The lights behind her had dimmed, but flashes still flickered through the curtains, proof that every second of her humiliation was now out in the world. She didn't care about the cameras anymore. She cared about the look she had seen in those faces, the quiet approval of cruelty, the ease with which strangers accepted her pain as entertainment. Her chest tightened, a storm of anger and disbelief pressing against her ribs. Evan followed, his voice low. "Miss Sinclair, are you hurt?" She shook her head, unable to trust her own voice. He hesitated. "They said you were trespassing. They truly didn't know?" Ava gave a bitter laugh. "They never see women like me as owners, Evan. Just guests until proven otherwise." She stepped into the dressing area. Mirrors lined the wall, throwing her reflection back a dozen times. White dress, smeared foundation, wrists scored with silver lines. A makeup artist reached for her, whispering, "I'm so sorry," but Ava raised a hand. "Don't. None of this is on you." She moved to the small table by the corner where her sketchbook lay open, the pages curling slightly under the heat. She traced the pencil marks that had built tonight's collection, the soft folds, the fierce shoulders, the colors she had chosen to show strength, not submission. This was supposed to be her victory. She remembered the years that had brought her here, the cheap fabric stores in Atlanta where she and her mother had bought scraps, the college professor who told her to focus on wearable art for your own people, the investors who loved her designs but not her face. Every door had been a reminder of who they thought she was. Every dress she created was a reminder of who she refused to stop being. The memories rose like ghosts, but she pushed them back down. She had learned early that emotion was a luxury. Survival required poise. Juliet Moore appeared at the doorway, pale, trembling. She still held the event program. "Ava, her voice cracked. "I saw your name right here. I should have said something." Ava looked at her reflection instead of her face. "You froze," she said softly. "So did everyone else. That's how it always starts." Juliet swallowed hard. "I want to make it right. I'm a journalist. I can." Ava turned then, finally meeting her eyes. "Tell the truth," she said. "Not the version that keeps people comfortable." Juliet nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks. Outside, the show was chaos. Sponsors whispered about liability. Guests hurried for the exits, afraid of becoming part of the story. But some stayed, shame written on their faces. Through the noise, Ava heard the faint sound of someone clapping a single slow rhythm that grew louder. She stepped toward the curtain and peeked through. One of her youngest models, barely 19, had started applauding. Another joined, then another, until the backstage was filled with trembling hands, clapping not for fashion, but for her. For the first time that night, Ava felt something warm spread through the chill that had settled in her. She looked to Evan. "They still think I'll cancel the show," she said. "But this show isn't over." He hesitated. "The press is outside. The police chief's demanding a statement." Ava straightened. "Then he can wait. The clothes will walk before I do." Juliet wiped her eyes and stepped forward. Let me help, she said. They'll listen if the story comes from me. Ava's gaze softened. Make sure they hear every detail, the cuffs, the silence, the looks. She turned to the models who had gathered behind her. Some were shaking, some were crying. We go on, Ava said. Not because they deserve it, but because we do. Her voice steadied the room. She reached for the microphone that still hung from the sound console, the one she'd used for backstage cues. Music, she said simply. As the first low chords filled the hall again, she lifted her chin. The audience outside murmured in confusion, expecting cancellation. Instead, the curtain stirred and parted. The first model stepped out, her dark skin gleaming beneath the lights, wearing a gown Eva had named Resilience. One by one, they followed, shoulders back, eyes forward. Eva watched from the wings, pride and fury tangling in her throat. Every step on that runway now carried the weight of what had just happened. The applause that rose this time wasn't polite. It was raw, almost desperate, like people begging to rewrite what they'd witnessed. Evan leaned close. You just turned humiliation into power, he whispered. She didn't look away from the stage. No, she said. I just reminded them power doesn't need permission. For a moment, she allowed herself to feel it. The ache in her wrists, the burn of tears she wouldn't shed, and the certainty that tonight something had shifted forever. She knew this wasn't the end of the fight. It was only the part where the world finally started paying attention. The next morning, sunlight spilled through the tall windows of Ava's penthouse, bright and merciless. The city outside buzzed, but inside her living room there was only silence, the kind that comes after a storm. On the table lay newspapers from every corner of the country. Black designer dragged off her own runway. Racism on the catwalk, power, prejudice, and fashion's ugly secret. Each headline screamed her name, yet none of them captured what it had felt like to stand under those lights, wrists burning, dignity stripped bare before strangers. Ava stared at the papers without touching them. Fame had never been her goal. Respect had. Now both felt tainted. Evan entered quietly, a phone in hand. Calls haven't stopped since dawn, he said. Sponsors want statements. Some are backing out. Ava looked up slowly. Let them. If they only stood with me when it was convenient, they were never really standing. Evan nodded, though worry shadowed his face. There's a press conference in 2 hours. I can cancel it. Ava's gaze moved to the window where the skyline shimmered in the morning haze. No, she said softly. They silenced me last night. I won't let them do it again. Her mother's old words echoed in her mind. They'll try to make you smaller. But remember, baby, small people can't see the stars. She inhaled deeply, the scent of fabric dye and lavender still clinging to her hands. Across the room, sketches of her next collection lay scattered, designs she had poured her soul into, meant to celebrate diversity and freedom. Now, they looked like unanswered prayers. Juliet Moore arrived unannounced, clutching a notebook and camera. Her eyes were red from lack of sleep. Ava, I wrote something, she said, voice trembling. The truth, every word of it. It's going live today. Ava's chest tightened. Why? Juliet's answer came without hesitation. Because I was silent when it mattered most. And silence is complicity. The words hit Ava harder than she expected. She saw the woman's remorse, and it stirred something in her. Hope, fragile but alive. Then make sure they know what really happened, Ava said. Not just the outrage, but the reason it still happens. Juliet nodded, tears glinting in her lashes. Evan's phone buzzed again. It's the police commissioner, he muttered. He says Officer Harlow's been suspended pending investigation. Ava didn't smile. Justice, she knew, was never that clean. Suspended means waiting, she said. I've been waiting my whole life for this city to open its eyes. She rose, smoothing the wrinkles from her blouse, her movements deliberate, controlled. I'll speak today, not as a victim, but as a woman tired of being mistaken for one. 2 hours later, the press conference hall overflowed. Reporters jostled for space, flashes blinding, as Ava stepped to the podium. She wore black this time, simple, sharp, commanding. The cuffs bruises were still visible on her wrists, faint but real. When the crowd hushed, she didn't read from notes. She spoke from the ache that still pulsed beneath her ribs. They thought they were removing a trespasser, she began. But what they really removed was their illusion that success has a color. I wasn't dragged off that stage because I broke a law. I was dragged off because I broke a pattern. Her voice didn't shake. It carried the strength of every woman who had been told she didn't belong. Those men didn't see a designer or a founder. They saw only what they were trained to see, and that blindness cost them their honor. Flashes erupted again, but she didn't pause. I built that runway, she continued. I hired every model, every tailor, every hand that touched those gowns. I built it from rejection letters and small miracles. And still, the moment I stood in the light, they decided I was an intruder. Her words landed like stones in still water, rippling through the room. Juliet stood in the back, recording every second, tears running unchecked. Evan watched from the side, his jaw tight with pride. Ava looked straight into the cameras. This isn't about me anymore, she said. It's about what we all allow when we stay quiet. If my silence last night was dignity, then my voice today is defiance. The hall erupted in applause, not the kind born from pity, but from recognition, people realizing they had witnessed a truth too sharp to ignore. For a brief second, Ava allowed herself to exhale. She thought of her mother's worn hands guiding a needle, the hum of the sewing machine in their tiny apartment, and how every stitch had carried a prayer that one day the world would change. When the cameras stopped flashing, Juliet approached, microphone in hand. What do you want people to remember from all this? She asked. Ava's eyes softened, and she answered without hesitation. That respect shouldn't depend on skin, silence, or shame. It should depend on who we are when no one is watching. Outside, protesters had gathered, holding signs that read, "We stand with Ava." The crowd parted as she walked out into the sunlight. For the first time since the night before, she smiled, not for victory, but for survival. The applause from the press conference still echoed in Ava's mind long after the cameras stopped flashing. By nightfall, her name was everywhere, on talk shows, news panels, trending hashtags, but fame had never felt so heavy. She sat alone in her office above the city, the window glass catching her reflection. For a moment, she didn't recognize the woman staring back. The face looked strong, unbroken, but the eyes told another story. She pressed her palms against the desk, trying to steady her breathing. Every light in the skyline seemed to ask the same question. What now? Evan entered quietly, setting a cup of tea beside her. You did what no one else could, he said. You turned their hatred into a headline they'll never forget. Ava managed a faint smile. Headlines fade, Evan. What lasts is the silence that comes after. She turned toward him, voice soft. When I was a girl, I thought success would protect me. I thought if I worked twice as hard, dressed twice as fine, spoke twice as gently, the world would see me as equal. But they didn't see me at all. They saw a shadow wearing silk. Her words hung between them, fragile and fierce. Evan wanted to comfort her, but he knew she didn't want pity. She wanted change. Then let's make sure they never forget your name, he said. We can file charges. We can push for reform. Ava shook her head. Justice isn't a press release. It's a mirror. They need to look at themselves first. Outside the office, rain began to fall, tracing lines down the window like threads unraveling from heaven. Ava stood and walked toward the mannequin that still wore her final gown, a deep gold dress she had titled Freedom's Fabric. Her hand brushed the cloth, the memory of that night flickering behind her eyes, the flash of cameras, the laughter, the sting of steel around her wrists. The humiliation replayed again, but so did the moment she had lifted her chin. She closed her eyes and whispered, "You didn't break me." Her phone buzzed. Juliet's name flashed on the screen. Ava answered. "You're everywhere," Juliet said breathlessly. "Your speech is being quoted in classrooms, talk shows, people are waking up." Ava sighed. "I don't want to be a headline, Juliet. I want to be a beginning." Juliet's voice softened. "Then let me help you tell the rest of it. Not the fashion, not the fame, the fight." Ava hesitated, then nodded, even though Juliet couldn't see her. "Tomorrow, come to the studio. Let's show them what truth looks like when it's sewn into fabric." The next day, Ava returned to the same venue where it all happened. The stage was empty now, stripped bare, the echo of footsteps haunting the silence. Workers were dismantling the lights, folding away what remained of her dream. She walked slowly across the floor where she'd once been dragged. Her heels clicked softly, the sound steady, like a heartbeat. Evan followed a few steps behind. "You don't have to be here," he said. "Yes, I do," she replied. "If I don't reclaim this space, it will own me forever." She stopped where it had happened, the very spot where the handcuffs had closed. The air still carried the ghost of that moment. She knelt, ran her fingers across the cool surface, and whispered, "This is where I take it back." A tear slipped down her cheek, not from pain, but from relief. Evan watched silently, understanding that this wasn't just about an arrest. It was about every door slammed in her face, every quiet prejudice she had swallowed to survive. Juliet arrived with a camera crew, keeping her promise. "You sure you want this filmed?" she asked. Ava rose, her back straight. "Yes. They saw my humiliation. Now they'll see my strength." She walked to the center of the runway. The lights flicked on again, warm this time, gentle. She turned toward the camera. "They called this trespassing," she said, voice steady. "But this is home." The crew said nothing. Even their breathing seemed to stop. For the next hour, Ava spoke openly about what had happened, the fear, the anger, the resilience. She didn't censor the tears that came. She let them fall because they were real. When Juliet finally lowered the camera, she whispered, "You just rewrote the ending." Ava smiled faintly. "No," she said. "I just wrote the truth." As they left, Evan looked back at the stage, now glowing softly under the studio lights. "You know," he said, "it doesn't look like a place of shame anymore." Ava followed his gaze. "It never was," she said quietly. "It was just waiting for the right story to walk it." They stepped out into the rain. The water felt cool against her skin, washing away the last traces of the night that tried to break her. She closed her eyes, breathed deep, and let the city's pulse merge with her own. This time, she didn't feel small at all. Days turned into weeks, but the memory of that night refused to fade. The footage of Ava standing on the empty runway went viral across news channels and classrooms alike. People called her brave, others called her a troublemaker, but to Ava, she was just a woman who had finally refused to shrink. Her fashion house, once a modest studio, was now flooded with letters and messages from women around the world, designers, students, mothers, all saying the same thing. "You gave us a voice." She read each one slowly, her heart breaking and healing at the same time. For every message of love, there was another filled with hate, telling her to stop talking about race, to be grateful she'd even been allowed in the room. She didn't answer those. Their words couldn't touch her anymore. One afternoon, Juliet arrived at Ava's workshop with the first printed magazine issue, featuring her story. On the cover, Ava stood beneath the headline, "The Woman Who Owned the Runway." Juliet handed it to her gently. "You've changed the conversation," she said. Ava ran her thumb along the glossy edge, her reflection shimmering in the ink. "I didn't want to change a conversation," she said. "I wanted to change the way they look at us when we walk into a room." Her voice cracked on the last word, but she didn't hide it. Pain had always been part of the fabric she worked with. Evan entered, carrying a stack of designs. "You should see this," he said, spreading them on the table. applications from new models, girls from everywhere. They say they want to walk for you because you made them believe they belong. Eva looked at the papers, her eyes softening. The faces on the applications were different shades, different shapes, beautiful in their own way. Then that's our next show, she whispered. Every woman who was told she didn't belong, she'll walk. Juliet smiled through her tears. You think people are ready for that? Ava met her gaze. It's not about ready. It's about right. She stood and moved to the window. The city below looked softer in the late afternoon light. The same skyline that had once made her feel small now looked like a canvas waiting for her to sketch her next dream. A week later, the venue doors opened again. Reporters filled the seats, not for scandal this time, but for solidarity. On stage, the runway was rebuilt exactly as before. Same marble, same lights. But this time Ava stood at the start, not the end. The room hushed as the music began. Low and steady, like a heartbeat, the models stepped out, one by one. Women of every background, every color, every size. They didn't just walk, they carried the weight of stories untold. The audience leaned forward, some crying quietly, others clapping in rhythm. When Ava stepped forward to close the show, the applause shook the wall. She wore a gown of pure white, the same color she'd been wearing the night she was arrested. But now the fabric shimmered with gold threads stitched across the waistlines that looked like healed scars. She paused at the edge of the runway, the light soft on her face. This, she said into the microphone, is not revenge. It's restoration. The audience rose to their feet. In the front row sat the police commissioner who had come to apologize publicly. His presence was silent, acknowledgement that the world was changing, if only a little. Evan stood behind the stage watching her with quiet pride, and Juliet filmed every moment, her hands steady this time. Eva felt the energy of the crowd ripple through her, warm and electric. She thought of her mother again, of sewing late into the night, whispering prayers into thread. She thought of the cuffs, the fear, the humiliation, and how even those had become part of her design. When the applause finally died down, she spoke again, her voice calm but full of power. You watched me be dragged off this very stage. Tonight you watched me walk it on my own terms. Remember that difference. It's what happens when truth outshines hate. For a moment, no one moved. Then someone in the crowd shouted, "We see you, Ava," and the entire room echoed it back, a chant that filled the air like a promise. Later, when the lights dimmed and the room emptied, Ava stood alone once more at the center of the runway. The silence no longer felt cold, it felt earned. She looked down at the faint reflection of herself on the polished floor. The woman staring back wasn't broken or afraid. She was proof. Proof that dignity can't be taken, only revealed. She smiled, small but certain, and whispered, "This stage was always mine." Outside, the night air carried the scent of rain and the hum of a city still learning to change. Ava walked out into it, shoulders straight, her white gown trailing like light behind her. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled, a soft reminder that storms come and go, but the sky always clears for those who refuse to bow. If this story moved you, don't just scroll away. Hit that like button to show you stand for dignity, not discrimination. Share this video with someone who still believes power has a color, and subscribe so you never miss the stories that prove otherwise. Now I want to hear from you. If you had been sitting in that audience the night Ava was dragged off her own runway, would you have stayed silent? Or stood up? Tell me honestly in the comments below. Your answer says more than you think.